to this episode of the Spinoza Triad, in which Richard, Dan and myself, John Gibbs, discuss artificial intelligence. We hope to apply philosophy and our understanding of human consciousness and intelligence to our understanding of artificial intelligence, which is, increasingly, one of the most interesting topics of our times. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
You started with a question, John. Well, it's the one you asked yesterday. What's the relationship between consciousness and intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a good start. That is a good start. Yeah, I think those are from what I can understand when discussing, and that's the task of today's discussion. Yeah, is to look at.
Might that question take us off on the wrong path a bit?
What the difference between intelligence and consciousness? I don't think so. I think because if you can have an intelligent machine, but you insist still, and that's a debate, that it is unconscious, that may be more worrying. That may be more frightening. That may be more, or it may be more, or it maybe asks us to think about what we mean by consciousness. And I think that's where philosophy comes in with artificial intelligence. Is it's asking us to consider our own intelligence, our own consciousness, and what we mean by those things.
Have you guys read David Chalmers, The Hard and Easy Problem of Consciousness?
I can't say I've read the book, no, but I know of his ideas.
No, but yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously we've got the Chinese room to get through as well.
Do you think, though, that there's, I mean, as a sort of, the problem of this is in that relationship? Do you have any sort of initial thoughts just on that before we get going with that? What about Dan? Do you have a thought on that?
Consciousness or intelligence? Yes, we can't be sure whether a machine is conscious or not as it gets more and more able to do certain things with enormous speed. But when it reaches that point of singularity that was coined by a guy called Vernon Vinge in the 1980s, as soon as it gets to the point of singularity, that question, that division between consciousness and intelligence won't matter. Because then it will be doing all sorts of things that even we as conscious individuals will not understand. We'll be cats trying to understand US foreign policy.
What about if we framed it in terms of not just AI, but for us, for people? You know, is there a division between, say, animal consciousness, intelligence? I put human in there as well. I mean, what do you see as a relationship between those?
Sorry, John. Yeah.
Well, if it's true, then I'll pick up your proposition there. That as time goes by, if intelligence, if the machines that we have today, and I'll take intelligence to mean something like capability. They can do things extraordinarily quickly. I mean, I think if you see someone and they can add up remarkably quickly, if they can remember things extraordinarily quickly, if they have a large reference library of memory, you say to them, well, you're very bright, you're very intelligent. That's the sort of thing we say. And a lot of our education system will define intelligence along the terms of those sorts of things, of a proficiency. Well, if a thing gets more and more and more and more intelligent over the years, and that seems to be where we're going. I mean, this debate since David Chalmers, that must be a while ago, 20 odd years, and before that, before the Turing Test, 1950s. What's happening is that the intelligence of machines is remarkable. If you take my definition, with its proficiency, it can do things, and your proposition, Dan, is that it won't matter in the end. In the end, we won't ask, are machines conscious? We'll just say, it doesn't matter because I now can't tell. Now that might be more, that leads us to a very kind of ontological problem, which is about human existence.
Well,
is that just us then? Are we not really conscious, but just very proficient machines?
Go on.
Oh no, I was going to say sorry about that. Just wheeling back on what you said there, John. So we don't perhaps need to go all the way to singularity. I mean, David Chalmers raises that point himself by raising the problem of philosophical zombies. He says even now, when we look at everyone else in the room, we can explain the easy problem of consciousness, which is we can see people paying attention, we can report people's mental state by the way they're behaving, we can see whether they're asleep or awake. Those are the easy problems of consciousness. But we can't explain the hard problems, which is like experience. What's it feel like to taste a banana, to smell a pong? You can't capture to capture those things. So what David Chalmers says is most of the presumption of inner consciousness is based upon only the easy problem of consciousness, which is the outward signs of it. So most of the manifestations of consciousness are just outward displays of behavior. So we could presume, he says, how do we know that that we are not philosophical zombies? And we might be performing everything in a certain way. We might meet people, we see them smiling, we see them happy, and we see them crying, and we therefore presume there's an inner life from those outward signs of behavior. But we can't actually gauge the consciousness going on inside. So the argument he puts forward for is a philosophical zombie, to say that most of the idea of consciousness, which hasn't been explained, is just a lot of hoping that people are conscious the way we're conscious.
And I'll add something to that, Dan, which is hoping that we're conscious the way we hope we're conscious. If you know what I mean. I mean, it's just possible, isn't it, that the human brain, remarkable instrument that it is, through hundreds of millions of, for many millions of years, I can say the human brain, if I take all of evolution, hundreds of millions of years, but has produced through a series of sort of adaptations, patches and upgrades to the world, has produced a profoundly powerful sense of our own identity. Yeah. And that we assume, sometimes you don't. I mean, there is all of us have had this view. I don't know if you've had it. Maybe just me. Might admit I'm a psychopath here or something. But when you look at other people and you think, I wonder if you're real. I wonder. I know I am, but I can't quite get the idea that you're the centre of your own universe as well as I feel I am.
But I think, just quickly on the initial consciousness and intelligence one, I would say that consciousness arises through an element of self-awareness. So intelligence, we've got, as you sort of defined it, John, collection, knowledge, this kind of thing, and consciousness is an element of self-awareness. So really, what you're gauging, I suppose, they call it the problem of other minds, don't they? The problem of other minds is then how much of self-awareness does the other or does someone else have? And like you say, you can't gauge it. The problem, I think, if you go too far down that route, though, is you end up in a kind of a sort of subjective idealism, Berkeley, isn't it? Where you start to think, is there anything outside of my? Is that you have to act as if everyone has another mind, because it wouldn't be rational to assume that nobody has another mind. You have to assume it's the rational response, isn't it, that someone else has a mind and is self-aware.
Absolutely, and as good philosophers, which is what we are, which is what we are, as good philosophers, we've introduced the idea of reality. I mean, the idea of the world external and the world internal, the mind and outside matter.
Can I just add
that? And I think that does that. Go on, Dan.
Can I just if we do solve the problem of other minds by presuming, I think that's what you're arguing there, Rich.
Well, I think it's I mean, you have to assume,
because there's no other possible way. except possible use of language and the way language structures and creates identity. But that's another discussion. So if we're using presumption, we would then have to, when we start to see machines either in software form or in some form of corporeal form, acting in a certain way that denotes consciousness, we would then have to give it the same, possibilities that we give to other people we meet in the street, and presume that they are conscious too. We can't jump into someone's head and experience their own qualia for them. That's the hard problem of consciousness. We just presume those qualia are going on, like they're going on inside us, ourselves, experienced individually. Whether we do that with machines or not, but it seems like the argument would say we'd have to, the argument you're putting forward there.
Well, I think
we make that presumption of consciousness to people. We should do the same with possibly machines as they unfold into the future.
I think it depends on what level of do we view machines and the possible intelligence that's coming, it is coming, as self-aware, or is it an intelligence? Because if it's just intelligence, then no, you probably wouldn't act as if it's conscious. If we start to see a level of self-awareness in the way that you would attribute to a person, but I mean, that's the human problem, isn't it? It's putting human traits onto other things. The same with animals, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely. I was just thinking. Right. I've written down animal. I mean, that's the same thing, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
we do that. And it's a problem. It's not an easy problem we solve with the living world around us. And we say things like plants aren't conscious, but animals are conscious. And then we sort of create a grade in your mind of things that you can eat and things you can't eat. Somehow, in some cultures you don't really like to eat horses, but somehow you associate it. Probably because you have some sense of them being more conscious. And if someone tells you, well, actually pigs are as intelligent as horses, that's a bit worrying, but I'll try to think about it.
Yeah.
So there is that kind of sense in which we do impose upon animals
project,
and the outside world. Yeah, a subjective moral order. And it's we can't know what it's like to be looking out from the eyes of an animal, or what kind of intelligence they have. Yeah, we'll assume a consciousness.
Yeah.
And we'll give that consciousness a moral value. Well, that's where we'll have to go with the AI.
But do you not think with animals, we haven't experienced AI yet at this level, but I mean, with animals, do you not think there's a kind of, we're haunted very much by kind of a religious ideology here, where you've got, even sort of atheists, or the way in which we think about this relationship, there's that kind of, you've got the problem of souls, haven't you? That traditionally, whether or not you believe or not, I feel like that kind of vague undertones of a religious discourse there, where humans have souls, animals don't, and whether or not you believe that or not, that's still a narrative, isn't it? It's still a story that underpins many societies. So by not having a soul, it means you're okay to eat them. They're there to serve you, and I feel that's sort of it's a line that runs within. This is how we justify treating pigs badly and horses.
Absolutely,
badly.
It is that thing when when you meet your religious aunt when you're a child, your religious grandmother, as I can remember doing, and she says something like, "Oh well, where's Granddad now, Grandma? He's in heaven." And the kid has to think about this and says something like, "Well, does everyone go to heaven?" Yeah, everybody goes to heaven. Right, okay, everyone goes to heaven. I won't introduce hell to this child right now. Well, everyone goes to heaven. Well, does the cat go to heaven? Yeah, the cat goes to heaven. Did the cat go to heaven? What about spiders? No, oh dear. Stop asking these questions.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right. That said, but
where is taking us, this discussion with the artificial intelligence?
Where we're taking that is that conscious sense of ourselves as having an individual identity. It's got to come from somewhere, and it's either the byproduct of the machinery of the mind. In other words, the blob of stuff in here and other things as well, the body and such like, produce that profound but illusory belief that I'm a unique individual, and so on, or because it's such a profound belief, so it feels so powerful. I can't quite get the idea that other people are the same. I'll find an explanation for this. Another subjective story, and the story will be that God put, or the universe or something, put within me something else, the soul. So I'll answer that. I'll say, if I can't believe it's a product of the mind, then it comes externally from somewhere else. But it feels that way, doesn't it? Of course it does.
Read some bits of this and seen the YouTube stuff. A guy called Yuval Noah Harari.
Yes, Harari. Yeah.
He's very interesting. He's sort of about the effects on the Anthropocene and the effects of humanity. And in a nutshell, I don't want to misquote him, he kind of says that AI isn't going to be wandering around talking to us like, the 1950s, 60s kind of sci-fi robots, but is going to be firmly embedded in our society through the way we all interact. It's going to change our humanity. It's going to change our stories. You started with stories there, started with religion, and heaven and hell. Well, what he's arguing is that AI will very subtly and very swiftly change the human story and start directing the human story to the point where we'll move so fast, the fact that we won't quite know what's happened, and that we will then become shaped by AI and led by it. So the stories will be led by AI rather than ourselves. Now, whether this is conscious or not is immaterial, but the fact it will have a massive impact upon society. And you can start to see it already with ChatGPT, a thing which has been ubiquitous and talked about the last 6 months or so. Everyone's downloaded it, put a quick look at it. It creates a sense, the whole point is this technology creates a sense of intimacy with human beings, and that intimacy will get even more and more deep as time moves on, and this will have serious implications for politics, society, spirituality, etc., and will change things enormously, some for the good, some for the worse. But the ideas we have now will mean very little in 100 years' time if we haven't dealt with the climate change crisis. But and we're still all here chatting away. Things will be very different because of AI. And I think that's the thing we should be discussing about. How would we relate to that difference? Or would we be able to relate to it?
But do you not think that the question of whether or not it's self-aware is not key in understanding or accepting it? Or do you think it's purely like a sort of hypodermic syringe model where we are just absorbing information?
I think what I'm trying to argue is I think it's going to change human consciousness.
Right, yeah.
I think, and so that's where it will manifest itself. You can see the level of, it's hard to say, you don't want to cast aspersions here, but human relationships, I'd say in the last, I'm not speaking for my own life here, but have gotten slightly more mechanical than they were 10, 15, 20 years ago. And is it to do with everyone peering at phones, which is the start of disappearing into AI? Your whole world is being produced for you by an algorithm. Spotify lists, etc., your Google search, everything is being marshaled. So your consciousness is being directed by the machine. Rather than other human beings and interactions and looking up and having conversations and talking, etc., those things that previous generations experienced.
In a sense, Dan, I mean, as you said that, I could see you hesitating to not adopt a kind of a lament for a more authentic world, which is that
old man sad,
yeah, exactly. Which
we don't want any of that nonsense.
Which you tend to do, yeah. I mean, when I was a lad, you talked to people and you played the piano, and you sang. And people don't, and so forth. Yeah. And so, human relationships.
The candle burn, yes.
Yeah, you did. And that was entertainment, watching a candle burn.
Yeah.
Sucking a mint was a night out.
Those are the things, lad.
Yeah. So I can see the way you're hesitant, but you can see that back not just in the 19th century, but before that, in a sense, the philosophers of the modern dealing with that to some extent is that the world is changing so fast, and change is the nature of our reality.
And our consciousness is changing because of these.
Yes, and it has been, and it absolutely has been. And you're right; it's not just looking at phones, but we live in a world of. I mean, we've talked about this in the past without retreading things. The loss of a kind of sense of augmented reality. A loss of a sense of forgetting. It's difficult to forget things now. I mean, we can so easily record, and that changes us. I mean, for a start, I have no memory at all of my grandparents, my great grandparents, or my great grandparents. I remember my grandparents a bit, but my great grandparents, no memory. But presumably, God help them, our descendants will be able to observe us wittering on, as you say, completely wrong about the future, we'll say, oh, how quaint, how absurd their ideas were. But nonetheless, we will kind of be there. Well, I don't know what that's going to do. That sense of changes our view of mortality, that changes of past people, and forgetting was part of our conscious reality. And it's going to be harder to forget things. It's just one small example. Yeah. Of, as you say, it's already there. I think we've been changing our relationship with the world through technology for quite some time. Yeah, and as you say, it's going to get even more dramatic.
This stuff largely goes back. I mean, what you're saying there, Dan. Do you remember the Postman stuff that we looked at, the technological determinism, the way in which he argues that technology is producing the culture. We're playing catch up. I mean, he was saying that in the 90s, wasn't he? And how what. He does also say in there that the information, there becomes so much information, it becomes shorter and shorter and shorter and shorter sound bites. And that's what you saw really with early social media, Twitter with shorter, you can only have so many characters, and Instagram videos were 1 minute, and the human being gets almost trained to have a shorter attention span. But I think there's another sort of evolution there that the relationship with technology and AI, because I'm assuming quite quickly that the AI could be designing the technology. I wonder how long it will be before it starts to develop technology that far surpasses anything that humans have managed to look at so far. I think that's something that will really start to evolve quickly then.
Singularity, isn't it? That's what's called singularity.
I think, isn't the singularity when information exponentially starts to duplicate at a level infinite almost, isn't it?
Once it surpasses the singularity point, obviously it has the capacity to grow infinitely, because it doesn't have the constriction of neurons that a human brain has.
Yeah,
it can use every other machine would grow at equal pace and would know every terminal, every aspect of software would know everything at the same time, because everything would be shared. Whereas human beings, all existing in their consciousness individually, restricted by the limits of their skull or their brain capacity. That's what we're discussing. What does that actually mean? But then it goes beyond it. And why people say that we should be afraid of this is because once it goes beyond, we will become like pets, like cats. And you could start to say, are we already, like in my earlier point, whereby, the AI or the computers or the technology, whatever term we want to use, is actually shaping the stories we tell ourselves and shaping aspects of human consciousness already. So imagine it has the capacity to go beyond human intelligence. What will that do to human intelligence? What would it do to the stories we tell ourselves that have already been said by the AI? So it's all going to be very intimate. It's going to be very odd, very intimate.
Yeah, it will be very odd, I think. But then again, very odd is where we are right now. For anyone who came from the past, that is one of the disconcerting things about getting old, is the world increasingly looks very, very odd. In all sorts of ways. I mean, it looks very similar as well. I mean, there's that cliche that things change, stay the same. But there are that idea of technology changing. Yes, absolutely. Where the idea that they're going to rise up against us
Oh, it's not that.
I don't. Not like the Invasion of the Robots, Terminator, or something like that. That kind. But
I don't think it's going to. That's too complicated. It's too expensive.
All the intelligences that we create, once they achieve this point of surpassing our abilities and so on, but and kind of cascades into the future, where they start learning from each other and so forth, much faster. Once that has happened, what we tend to do is, that would be terrible. That's partly, I think, because of our own. That's a kind of guilt of humanity. We treated the world badly. We treat each other badly. Our own intelligence appears to be as cruel as it is creative. Won't that be true of intelligences that we create? They'll be supremely crueler and more distant from us than we can imagine. So we will be the animals then. We'll be the insects then.
Yeah, like
we'll either be ignored or we'll be exploited.
Yes.
Well, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think it'd be very different, but I think that's us talking to ourselves about our own guilt.
Oh, I see. Right.
I think it's a narrative we've imposed on. So whenever you hear "fear it," watch out, that you're just worried about we buggered the world up, and we are assuming that our intelligence. Well, because that is a problem. I'll just go off on a tangent here. Our problem for us is we're supremely intelligent. As far as we can tell, there's nothing else in the universe as intelligent as us. The really surprising thing is that we haven't come across intelligent things in space and such like the communicating universe. It's extremely rare. This level of intelligence seems to be extremely rare in the universe. Life may not be rare, but intelligence appears to be extremely rare. So we may be it. In fact, it's just possible we are the only conscious things in the universe that can say these sorts of things and look back at themselves and wonder about it.
Well, let's not go into that too much.
So, I've completely lost some of the point now. I've forgotten what I'm going to say.
So basically, you were saying intelligence could be seen as a bad thing, maybe because we've used it badly, and that's why we feel guilty.
That's the point I was after, Dan. Thank you very much. You've got me back on the rails. Yeah. Why isn't human intelligence benign and creative and astonishingly humane? And it doesn't appear to be. Our behaviour suggests intelligence is a bit of a curse. In fact, it may be that the reason there's not much intelligence in the universe is because it's a death sentence. There are all sorts of intelligent civilizations pop up in the universe, but don't last very long. Like, we're not going to last very long because it's not a great idea to be intelligent. It produces a kind of savagery.
Yeah, because it's ridiculous. The best expression of intelligence is competition. I don't get that. It's ridiculous, isn't it?
Yeah.
When you can achieve so much more through cooperating.
I always hoped so. I hope so.
Without being a communist or without going extremes, people cooperate, they achieve more. People compete, they achieve less. One person might win at the expense of everyone else.
I mean, are we, just so we're confusing perhaps intelligence with consciousness? Perhaps. I mean, I wonder, intelligence on its own, in a pure sort of mechanical sense, is if we're applying ethics to it, there has to be a level of, do you not think, a level of self-awareness to that intelligence, perhaps, or maybe the void, that a total lack of it, or can you, if you replicate enough intelligence, if you like, or enough data you have going in there, will it or can it become self-aware? And can we kind of define or break that down, into something?
Well,
I mean, with sorry, just quickly, with AI, does it become, with singularity? Is that also a level of self-awareness? From what you're saying there, Dan, I'm wondering, are you saying that it doesn't need any self-awareness? Is that just us imposing a kind of human construct onto that? Because I think it's key. The reason that we interact, or I could see AI becoming what will shift, is when it has its own opinions and its own thoughts, and it already does, doesn't it? With Chat GTP, you can ask questions, and there's definitely a kind of a viewpoint that it has.
Yeah, but that's just a simulation. That's not necessarily. It's like a computational model of consciousness, isn't it? It's not really necessarily the same thing as a conscious thing. It's like when you talk to Alexa and it says certain things. As long as you use Alexa, it will have a discussion with you. As long as you end every sentence with Alexa, it's like, so I don't need to go out this evening. I can talk to Alexa.
If you break, sorry, John, just quickly. I mean, just because within that, I mean, and again, you can kind of problematize that with the kind of consciousness bit, can't you? Because I know that there are studies done, aren't there, on humans whereby actual conscious decision making is occurring after the brain has made up its mind what it's going to do. You know, do you turn left, do you turn right? Well, you think you're making a conscious decision, but on fMRI scans, you can see that the choice has already been made before you've consciously made it. So I'm just still thinking around that area of self-awareness, consciousness. Do we put too much weight in it within human beings? Because empathy and very real things in the world, other human suffering is based upon this primacy of consciousness, or perhaps that's something that we're overstating here when we're looking at AI.
It might be a deeply human thing. It's your interesting thing. I forget the study that shows that the brain is making decisions before the conscious self has. It's a very interesting study. I forget where it comes from, but it's a very interesting one. And that's terrifying for us as human beings, because we'd say, therefore, nobody's responsible for anything, and nobody should be praised for anything, because it's just brains bumping into each other. There's nothing more to it than to life than that.
That's because we don't like the idea of determinism. We don't like that idea. We don't like the idea of loss of free will. We assume a great zone of free will, when actually free will is very narrow, if it exists at all. We don't like that idea. But that's probably a podcast for another day.
Another podcast,
but another podcast on free will and determinism. But the idea that that my brain is already, I'm going to pick this cup up now, but actually my brain was already sort of mulling on the bits of the brain that said the cup picking up bits of the brain, already had that some time ago. Doesn't really worry me. All that suggests is the brain's an awful lot more complex than I imagined, and that I'm not surprised at all. And that leads us to the discussion of what exactly consciousness is, because it clearly isn't one thing. It isn't like a binary. I'm asleep, I'm awake. Because there's levels of consciousness while you're awake, and there's levels of consciousness while you're asleep. And anyone who's had a full-on anesthetic will realize that's a very different kind of unconsciousness to the unconsciousness you experience when you sleep. And being awake, there's being in the moment, there's being very alert to the moment, and so forth. So consciousness is very fluid. And it's not surprising, therefore, that my brain is working on all sorts of unconscious things ever since Freud got hold of this idea, that I am not conscious of myself. The one thing I'm not conscious of is myself. It doesn't surprise me at all.
Is that different to AI, though, Dan? That's very similar in some respects. Then you're going to end up with something in AI, if we take it as a sort of universal, that's the other interesting, wasn't it? If we're defining consciousness within humans as being separate entities, people like Jung will argue for a collective conscience, but in machines, is it one singular artificial intelligence of which you feel different strands depending on your phone? It's almost like octopus tentacles coming down, where everyone gets a sort of different version, but it is one. Or will there be a multiple AIs where you have a personal kind of relationship?
It'll be one.
It'll just
be like the internet.
One.
It'll be like Google being conscious,
or not. Perhaps it evolves in such a state whereby you get different forms of AI. I know in the discussion, the guy I can't remember his name. The guy that wrote the book. He wrote a book on happiness, and he's just done one on AI. And I heard an interview with him. He was one of the guys that initially worked a lot in this area, and he was saying about good AI and relatively speaking, good AI and bad AI, and how various forms of AI will then combat negative forms of AI. But he did say it will change everything. I mean, quite worryingly, his one bit of advice was to be nice to it.
Well, again, that's that underlying fear that, oh dear, we treated the world badly, so with so well forms of intelligence that we create in the future. Absolutely, I don't think we can leave this conversation without agreeing that whatever it does, it will change everything. But everything has been changing. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Anyone coming from a few hundred years ago to the present will say everything's changed.
That's what Descartes said at the beginning. He said it's not possible that a machine would able. I think that's I came across a point that Descartes, talking about this, said it's not possible for any machine to ever think or to ever come up with any computation whatsoever. So there's no. So people in the past would not be able to understand what is going on at the moment. So you're absolutely right, John.
Only a few years ago, I had a conversation with people who insist entirely that it was that a computer can never beat someone at chess because there was an area of chess which was kind of creative and inspirational and intuitive, and an AI will never paint things because the painting is inspirational and intuitive, and it'll never be able to crack a joke because that's special to humans, sense of humour, irony, and such like. Well, it all appears to be those are tumbling. I mean, it's Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov, and then we all thought, oh dear. Always thought chess was a bit beyond computers, and now the world's best Go player has been beaten, and so on. So it's undoubtedly true that myth that there's a special kind of inspirational creativity comes from the gods, maybe comes from the muses, that computers will never touch. I doubt we're going to see that fall apart. It's already fallen apart. There won't be a bit of human intelligence that's reserved for us.
I think there'll be. I think you're right, Dan, what you were saying earlier, though, about the melding of technology and humans. And I just think that when AI starts to develop the technology, that's when, because you know, does the phone become some kind of pill that you swallow that literally goes into your brain, or nanobot that goes in there and then starts to work within you, you know, and it's. But I mean, just is it worth here? You know, we're talking about a relationship between human beings and AI, and perhaps how we would then form it. What about the Turing Test? Are we past that now?
Well, because that is one of the most famous, isn't it? That is the sort of we'll know when we've created artificial intelligence because it will be able to fool us and fool the most panel of experts. The Turing Test. Once a piece of artificial intelligence can communicate with us so that it's indistinguishable from a human being, then it's achieved intelligence. Well, I think we talked the other day briefly about this, that you might say, well, that's daft, because the other day I was on, you know, when you phoned up some company or other, and a very polite young woman answered, and you realised disconcertingly after a second or two that in fact this was an auto voice or an AI produced voice. Or you could have conversations with ChatGPT, which are convincingly real, or at least they're not convincingly real after a little bit. They're certainly down the road. So you say, oh, well, the Turing test didn't work. But actually, Turing was also saying that, more subtly, what we said earlier, that what intelligences of the future will do two things. Once you can't tell that intelligence imitates us, the imitation game, once it imitates us so convincingly, does it matter? In the end, intelligence of that kind, if it convinces us it's real, it is real. Because aren't we just imitating? And that's where we came in on this conversation in a way. You know, does consciousness? There's a special preserve of consciousness, which we insist. And then so the answer, well, not the answer, but an alternative view is the famous Chinese room thought experiment. If I were in a room and I've got every kind of files and files and files of instruction manuals which give me how to respond to Chinese letters, even though I properly grammar and syntactical instructions and so on. If I get the syntax right and have the instructions to do it, if someone sends messages under the door in Chinese, which I can't speak a word of, that I have the proper responses laid out before me, then I give them back, pull them out of the cards, pull the cards out, check the things, put them back under the door. The person outside is convinced there's a native Chinese speaker in there, and in fact I'm just simulating the ability to speak Chinese. So that's John Searle. And John Searle's observation there is asking us to do that. So, simulated intelligence isn't consciousness. Well, does it matter? And maybe I'm just a simulated consciousness. So we're back to the problem you said, Dan, of the human of the conscious zombies. The zombie. How can I be certain if I have no soul and my brain is just a millennium-long product, a millennium-long project to produce consciousness, and it does it so effectively that I am convinced I have a true identity? Does it matter? Other than to be a bit disconcerting to wonder if we are, just simulations.
Well, it does matter, because without it, then obviously any systems of ethics or morality become meaningless. If you're not, so I think as Rich was saying, it's a very human thing. So it might not matter so much to machines whether machines will be ethical or moral. Maybe they will be in their own way. Who knows? If they ever get there. But the way we are at the moment, we can't prove that consciousness is, that's another podcast, free will and determinism. We can't be sure that consciousness is in the driving seat of our decisions, but we definitely act as if it is. Otherwise, our society would turn to dust very quickly.
But you're using the word, Dan, act. And act, it can mean, pretend, simulate, like an actor. And you say, well, in the world, I may not be convinced that other people are real. If I'm a psychopath, probably absolutely don't think they are. But I'll act accordingly. I'll assume that's true. I assume all other human beings. I can't know that when I look at the colour red, you see red. We'll just agree on that agreed code. I can't know that.
No, you can't.
Your ethical values are the same as mine, but we'll agree on a code, and we'll fall out over it from time to time. We might disagree that that's not red, that's not red, that's orange. But we nevertheless, our negotiations between ourselves will produce an agreed means of rubbing along together, even though we're locked in our lonely little heads.
That discussion you're describing there so well, John, is the acceptance of human consciousness. If we were told by science, we may be in 20, 30 years' time, that the physical determinists have their way, and so that consciousness is just a relic from the past. It's not really describing anything. There is just brain acting, physical organisms in your head making decisions for you. Then those discussions, which are always polite and measured, would be meaningless. And people would stop referring to them. And then we would just gobble a pill, as Rich says, to moderate behaviour. And there would be no more than bio-machines. So this consciousness is vital, because it does, I suppose that's why we've been talking about it, it does separate us from the machine and allows us to have a different experience, which is what we haven't really talked about in this discussion, is the qualia, which is never explained, of the hard problem of consciousness. You've just said, John, about experiencing red or a colour. These things, science hasn't even begun to explain, I should say, how a neuron firing can produce a qualia. They don't know what the relationship is between the brain and qualia. And qualia is the scientific term for consciousness, being aware of a smell, being aware of a sound. They can't see any connection between that and the brain firing. Until that's explained, society still has consciousness. Once that's explained, then everything becomes physical. And then we are no more than bio-machines. And then we perhaps understand how the artificial intelligence would operate without a soul, because if we don't have consciousness, we don't have a soul either. We're just brain. We're like, just a physical organism like a liver or a heart.
So we tend to fall into a camp of those who say, you'll never explain it. And I think they're in the same area as people who thought that that computers would never play chess. Yeah, it's a hard problem. It's insoluble. Consciousness is an insoluble problem. It's a mystery, you know. And those who say, well, no, we're not. It's that we are going to solve this, and we are going to probably understand consciousness, and what the consequences of that will be.
Maybe it'll be computers that will tell us what the hard problem of consciousness is.
What about panpsychism as it relates to that? I mean, doesn't panpsychism argue that everything has some form of consciousness anyway? It's a bit like the kind of Spinoza argument, isn't it, with God being everywhere? But from what I could get from it was that panpsychism argues that everything has a level of consciousness to it, you know, a small element of self-awareness, and really if it is everywhere and everything has some consciousness, then does that go some way of addressing Chalmers' problem of hard problem of consciousness?
I think it does, because I think then we are asked what the consciousness maybe comes in tremendous varieties. Again, as we started at the beginning, plants are conscious if they react to the things around them. They do. I mean, trees apparently communicate through their roots and so on. And all sorts of animals and so on, they have some form of consciousness. It's very different from our consciousness. We can never understand entirely what that is. They live in a world of so different from us that we probably can't comprehend their consciousness. So if consciousness may be insoluble, it may be that and the reason it's insoluble is because we are conscious humans trying, as you say, maybe only AI will ever solve it, because conscious humans can't understand their own consciousness. No more than I can understand the consciousness going on inside the mind of a bat or something of that kind. And so consciousness may exist in all things. It may be of all sorts of varieties. It's impossible to understand. And all our consciousness is our own consciousness. It's the consciousness of human beings built out of language and metaphor and symbols and imagery that makes our consciousness ours. So maybe the universe has its own consciousness. Maybe the world has its own consciousness, and all things are linked together by although I think
it's just a story.
Yeah, but that may be another myth and story and narrative we want to impose on the world.
And that's all human consciousness is, a story.
Which is what makes it so interesting, I think, with this AI stuff, because we don't have stories yet of which to understand the possibilities of where it's going. Or we have stories that we can approximate at it, but it's got me when I thought about this stuff. I thought, what language do you use to engage with something which we've never experienced? You know, AI as it unfolds, why would it not have consciousness? So you have to start thinking that if it has infinite intelligence, as it probably will do, as it develops, what's to say there is no level of self-awareness within that? And how do we then think about the birth of consciousness in that sense? We've got the history of the birth of consciousness within humans, or we've got through mythology, we've got it through religion, we've got it through literature, stories. We've got a sort of neurobiological, psychological, psychoanalytic. We've got all of these different languages that we can use to understand consciousness. Because I did sort of muck about with the idea. If you think about things like mythology, depth psychology, that Jungian approach has a lovely way of looking at the way the sort of mythological stories of the birth of consciousness and how it's developed. I wondered if some of that would fit in with AI. Eric Newman's book, The Origins of the History of Consciousness. It starts off with he calls it an Ouroboros, it's symbolic around like a snake biting its own tail. You know, that kind of circle. And he talks about then how myth it breaks from that, the Great Mother, the separation myth. You know, this is what I said initially about self-awareness with AI consciousness. How would it break from human consciousness? How would it develop its own story? And then you've got, you know, the Joseph Campbell and Jungian ideas here around the birth of the hero and the hero myth, which, you know, goes off and starts to famously in psychoanalysis as well, you know, the slaying of the mother, the father, castration. How then do we argue then that AI consciousness will involve a separation from human and to become its own qualia, its own self-awareness, and what language? How do we engage with that? Because we haven't experienced yet. We've got no idea. At the moment, our culture, the dominant language of our culture is scientific, and it's limiting in its ability, because it's only ever testing hypotheses that can be falsified, which is great for a certain set of, like you use the word stories, Dan, a certain set of stories. But I wonder if the stories that are going to be coming through this will be way beyond what that will allow us. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, I'm not at all surprised by the sort of idea of the unity of mythology and the narrative structures that we all seem that shared across cultures, and the unconscious imagery that seems to be common to humanity, and so on. I'm not surprised that mythology and legend and so on and dreaming can show insights, because we're all human. So although I'm not certain that when you look at red, you're seeing the same red as me, I bet it's not far off, because you're human. So it's that Wittgenstein thought experiment of the beetle in the box. So he's got a box and you've got a beetle in it, but everyone else has got a box and they've got something else in it. And you can't see into anyone else's box. You open your box up and you say, "Oh, no, it's a beetle." Well, you don't know it's a red. You give it the word beetle. And someone opens their box up and assumes they've all got the same. So they say, "Oh, yeah, it's so have I. Someone's got a spanner in their box." You can never quite know what it is, because the language, the codes of language we've agreed on define are shared, but our own individual consciousness is unique.
I think the strength of the mythological argument, which, for human consciousness, has been historically the way in which they map out across the ages and across history. It's looking at it in a collective sense, which may be a strong way of looking at it might be a useful tool to look at AI, because it's a collective consciousness. It's a singular, but it's universal. But will it develop into singular, like we said earlier, singular pods of AI-ness, or are we going to have one totality of it? We're talking about ego formation, really, aren't we? Does AI end up with ego formation? Does it view its eye?
Again, we're anthropomorphizing it. We're just saying it will be kind of like human beings. That's the whole point. It might be like nothing which we could ever relate to. And we come up with ideas that we have no understanding. So my earlier point about the cat trying to understand, the Middle East.
No, you're absolutely right, Dan. But at the same time, we will have to think about it and speak about it in some sense. And
we might be around.
We can argue that in with more or less anything, though, can't you? That it's that everything is put across as some form of story, of which you put a human dimension to it.
Well, yeah. Well, now we're becoming futurologists, which is but again, we are getting to sci-fi because it's Philip K. Dick, isn't it? It's will androids dream of electric sheep? Will they dream? Will androids have Freudian slips? Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to say that.
Will they feel uncertain?
Will they feel uncertain? Will they get anxiety? Will they dream? Will they, all those things?
I think science fiction probably will give you a better approximation of possibility over anything else.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Oh, there's a lovely was it Black Mirror episode where there's someone has a robot that cleans the house, and the robot, of course, follows its logic process to cleaning the house, realizing the human is the mess maker, and in the end kills the human because I remember my father saying to me, he said he worked in aircraft simulators, and he said, well, the most dangerous component on a plane is the pilot. It's increasingly that everything else is very, very reliable, but the pilots. The number of crashes and caused by pilot error is extremely great. So a lot of the things put into aeroplanes are there to mitigate against pilot ego and pilot stupidity and pilot mistakes and pilot lack of consciousness. The machines should have taken over. When cars can be driven by machines, they'll be a whole lot safer.
Well, I've got that in my new car. The car coming up to the traffic, it says proximity, and it stops. It brakes before I could brake.
Brilliant.
This is weird.
What about? I mean, we mentioned our ethics and AI. I mean, you hear. I know Elon Musk. I heard him speaking the other day on an interview, and he was saying about the lack of regulation and how important it was to put systems in place. But I mean, AI, not AI necessarily, but robots. I mean, with the science fiction kind of angle here, you know, Asimov talks about this, doesn't he? With the three robot laws that you know, I don't remember what they are. I think the first was something like robots can't harm humans, or they have to, you know, these kinds of three kind of arguments there. And I wonder whether or not perhaps with the development of AI, will there be AI laws that we put in place? You know, do we constrict the development they can have? Will there have to be something like that?
Yeah, there already, in a way, there already are. They'll build on data protection laws, and we'll have to have laws about how they're used. Humans will have to develop laws to learn how to live with AI.
There was with nuclear technology. There is nothing at the moment for AI. That's what the big discussion's about.
Well, actually, that's interesting. You should say that, Dan, about nuclear. You know, now that Oppenheimer is out. I've not seen Oppenheimer yet.
No, I haven't seen it yet. No.
Yeah, but Oppenheimer and Barbie.
Yeah.
Have you seen that, Richard? Have you seen Barbie?
No, funny enough, John, I haven't yet.
I thought that'd be your kind of film, really.
No, my Nikki's seen it, and my daughter's seen it. Yeah.
Oh no.
No,
I
think.
Oh, sorry. Can I? Oh, anyway, I was going to say that human beings, you wouldn't, if you were around in about 1950s, early 50s, 60s, and you say, well, as Oppenheimer thought, he says that famous quote from the Hindu Vedas or something, you know, I am become something, destroyer of worlds. I've become the destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
And you think, well, yeah, really, how did we escape that bullet then? Human beings, in all their gross stupidity, have been given the ability to annihilate themselves. I'm going to go with for our listeners, don't worry about the robots. We managed atomic bombs.
Probably, let's wait to see how Ukraine plays out.
Well, but we are the generation or two that have lived with the possibility of extermination through atomic bombs. Yeah.
What about the treatment of AI? If we can say that there's a level of self-awareness, if we can say they're conscious, then does that affect how we use them? Because, you know, are we going to end up with another a proletariat, and another sort of work? Can we treat them? Could AI have rights if it's self-aware?
I think it'll be so much better than us. We would be. It wouldn't need to. It would have to be giving us rights, like we give animal rights. You know, it would have to be working out. I don't think we would be in a position to give the AI rights. I think it would be the other way around.
There's that observation. Let's hope the robots treat us better than we treat animals. Yeah, I mean that kind of, they and that again. We're circling back a little bit because that conversation, it doesn't matter. That conversation earlier, that why doesn't increasing proficiency of intelligence produce greater moral obligation and community and so on? Because it hasn't necessarily done that with humans. Yeah, it has. No. You could also argue we are an awful lot more humane than we used to be, and we don't have people fighting in rings for entertainment anymore like Romans did, and we don't have slavery is generally considered not a good thing, even though it still exists. So we are our moral intelligence and sense of our obligation to animals even has changed in our lifetime. And people used to treat animals much more. They still treat animals appallingly, but you know we are at least we're guilty about it. You know, you tuck into that ham sandwich, but you're worried about the pigs being intelligent. And you look for the red tractor, you know. Oh, that's right, the happy pigs.
One of the issues we said earlier, but people worry about things, but all the same, you still eat the ham sandwich. Does it really matter if you consciously have a thought about it? I mean, it's kind of, and I think really this is where we said about initially the sort of consciousness versus intelligence and that kind of self-awareness. because I think that's really the key question here with AI. We are definitely going to head towards something which has information which you can access, but does that massive
learning as well
bank? Yeah, does it self-learn? Does it self-teach itself? And therefore, is it self-aware? And if we have a level of self-awareness, then, to use Dan's phrase here, the stories by which we engage with it become radically different, don't they?
Yeah,
we will be following its story. Yeah,
maybe not. Who knows?
Well, it's either. I mean, if the future and science fiction explores this, it transcends humans to a degree that we become irrelevant to it, insects, servants to it, or whatever, or possibly that whatever AI of the future how it ever manifests itself, it will still be our creation. So it will reflect us more than the other life forms might.
Yeah.
So it'll still be and which you can argue, therefore, it'll always be a tool of humans. It'll be created by humans for humans. It will be a version of us, at the very least. You could argue, and unless it stops being like us and starts constructing its own identity.
I think that's more likely. Yeah,
have to wait and see on that one, probably.
Yeah,
not too long though. Probably not too long. Yeah. We might even see it in our own.
I think so. Yeah,
our own short span.
I think with technology as we have at the moment, it just becomes more of a problem as technology develops, doesn't it? It is, and our reliance on technology, which is already beyond, trying to live without it now, is more or less impossible, isn't it? But I think as it starts to develop and everything becomes dependent on it, down to your own kind of relationship with yourself, if you like, your own consciousness becomes bound to machinery and technology, which to an extent it is.
Where we are.
Evidence of that: leave your phone at home and go out, see how you feel. You experience anxiety, don't you? Where's my phone?
How long have you gone without your phone? I'm going to try and do that for a couple of days this holiday. I'm just going to not touch my phone, leave it uncharged, and see whether I can do that.
Is that because you have
too much.
It's again, you're a romantic, Dan. You want to. You walk past cottages where some bloke's working on the roof, thatching it, eating his ham sandwiches, and you think, I wish I'd done that. I wish I'd become a thatcher on the roof. I wish I'd become a mower in the fields. I don't all this technology and ideas and stuff. I want to be authentic.
No, it's a humongous waste of time. If you're not using it deliberately and it's just in your hand, you can just lose so much time just staring at it. I might be speaking for myself, I don't know, but so if I leave it at home, I can be more productive.
But I wonder if the future might not be like many of these kind of dystopian science fiction kind of narratives where you've got a split of people, like you say, that want the technology, that engage with it, that go along with the tide or the flow and use it for their works and everything else. And then I think you're going to have a kickback against that, where people do go towards this kind of authentic, growing their own vegetables. We were laughing at this before, but just becoming as much nature based as you can be, and a move away from technology. I wonder if the future will have that, because there's a lot of the fears, digital currency stuff and all of the issues that we've seen, like this surveillance societies kind of thing. It's all contingent on technological developments. If you get rid of it all and you go back to basics, as it were. I mean, I think there'll be a move culturally towards that, definitely moving forward.
I think you're right. I think it'll be a kind of a position of being quite, probably a kind of an elitist position to be without digital communication, without the need to reach out for the internet.
Isn't that
a position of power, actually, not to have to do that? It's only been available for the super wealthy to go back to a simple life. Yeah.
I mean, most studies on mental health will argue that the best things you can do is eat non-processed, organic as you can food. Go outside in the sun, experience the weather. Go outside in nature and spend as much time there as you can. Exercise, so move, so do all of the sort of all of the things that people once would have done anyway without technology. And then you've got ever growing rates of mental health issues, which are intimately bound to technology, aren't they?
Yeah.
You know, the more time you spend on a screen, the more time you're listening to other people or watching how other people are living, and it's a kind of a negative spiral, isn't it? Really, it seems to be.
Yeah, I've definitely mixed feelings. But I mean, when I'm out and about and I see, again being an old fogey, I see people, together but not together. A series of people, in a bar, in a pub, who are basically sitting together but are all engaged on their own phones. Yes, some speak to each other, share your view, and so forth. I do have that, and a bit of me wants to tell kids, I hear my parents telling me to stop staring at the television and go outside and play. But there's no doubt about it, is there also that this technology connects people and gives the ability to see things and hear things and say things, as well as waste your time.
And John, but also to be watched, observed. Every minute detail of your thought process. We'll say every minute detail, but the thoughts you have, every Google search, every location that you go to, every communication that you have is now not your own. It's stretched across. It's within devices that I'm assuming are becoming more and more available to outside.
That I think worries me a bit more. I mean, because I can't really worry too much about the robots taking over the world or us being pushed aside by super intelligent creatures, because that will or won't happen, and it's still not quite here. What does worry me, and it is here, you're right, is the surveillance of our society and the way it changes our relationship with work, our relationship with each other. And if you want to see a model of where this is going, places like China, where they are racing ahead with research into AI in order to manage and control their population.
Well, that's how all the takeover would happen if this kind of mythical takeover does occur. It would be very subtle. It wouldn't be storms of robots walking down the street. It would be the machine saying, "I don't think you should have that for supper. Perhaps you should have this." I've noticed you've been on the internet for a bit too long today. Do you think you should go out for a walk?
Yeah, it's true. Well, the subtlety the control will be quite subtle. I think a lot of Chinese people don't realise that they, if you go and ask people on the streets of China, what about Tiananmen Square? That was a terrible event. They've not heard of it, so you can write things out of history. However, the other side of and we're getting on to a discussion about the value of the internet. Some will have heard of it because they know how to hack through and get information and so forth. But the subtlety of AI is when you go on something like TikTok and I said this to you, Richard, the other day, you try and play it, you try and game it. I shan't look at certain things, I'll look at other things. I'm in charge of this, and you realise quite quickly it's in charge of you. It's led you down the rabbit holes of things. Chinese control of the population, though, and it isn't necessarily guaranteed that liberal democracy will win out. It's certainly not doing a great job at the moment. When you look at China, you look at Russia, you look at other countries in the world, controlling the population, managing the population through authoritarian AI. I think that's a serious worry.
Well, if you end up with a cashless society, and it's become centralised, and it's more like a sort of voucher system, which you hear people talking about now, then I think it becomes even more, like, as Dan was saying, it becomes more controlling in that sense. Because then, like you say, depending on what it's like a series of, I don't know if you've been covered in Black Mirror, but depending on what you've viewed, your conduct online will depend what you can spend your voucher or money on, and you're not allowed to keep money for too long. All these kinds of these arguments out there.
Yes,
it removes human autonomy, doesn't it? And freedom, which again, I think moving forward could push that split between people who are, like you say, Dan, probably haven't thought of that. It probably will be the very affluent who are able to go back to basics, get rid of the technology,
away from the AI,
yeah,
free of the AI, and just go for a walk and leave your phone at home. That'd be
and we become controlled, the rest of us, by the algorithm. Really, the algorithm will dictate what you can do and what you can't do. And the thing is, when we think of it as an algorithm, we think in a very mechanistic. You don't think when you use the word algorithm of consciousness, do you? Like an AI consciousness. It's just that becomes then algorithm is a form of intelligence, but it doesn't have an eye, does it? It's not a thing in the same way as we were discussing earlier, which I think becomes interesting thinking about this in terms of as a singular thing, separate. As I was saying about the depth psychology stuff about castration, and is there an ego formation, using that word, within AI where it's castrated from its humanness, and it starts to learn independently either for the best of itself or however it's going to develop, but away from human. It's in that sense, it's very much like a kind of intelligence, it's like consciousness. These old arguments, mythological arguments around the development of consciousness in that sense, because an algorithm isn't the same, is it? But or is it, again? It's just language that we're using.
You have been listening to the Spinoza Triad as we attempt to apply philosophy to the world around us. This week we discussed artificial intelligence and how our understanding of consciousness, human identity and intelligence might give us an insight into a world that is rapidly approaching. Thank you for listening, and if you've enjoyed this discussion, you can listen to our past episodes on Spotify and multiple other platforms. Thank you.